On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen blinds of my suburban home, I was standing by the sink, wiping down the granite counter, when my phone hummed softly on speaker. My younger sister Victoria's voice floated into the room, carrying a rushed, artificial sweetness that immediately put my instincts on high alert. "Clara, sweetie, you really don't need to come up to the Canandaigua Lake house this summer," Tori blurted out, barely taking a breath. "Brandon thinks it's just better if we keep the property exclusively for our immediate family this year." I paused my hand mid-stroke, watching a single soapy bubble dissolve against the dishcloth. But I didn't gasp or drop the phone. I simply raised my eyes and stared at the dry erase calendar pinned securely to my refrigerator door. Tori rushed forward with her hollow excuses, desperate to preempt any pushback before I could speak. "Brandon's parents are flying in from San Diego, his siblings want to bring all their kids, and it's just going to be completely packed. You wouldn't be comfortable with all that noise and chaotic energy anyway. We're hosting a massive family reunion barbecue on the 24th of June, so it just makes more logical sense if we have the whole place to ourselves." "Makes more logical sense?" she had said, as if erasing my existence from my own haven was merely a harmless scheduling adjustment. I let the silence stretch across the line, feeling the cold weight of her betrayal, before replying in a completely flat, measured voice. "I see." Tori hurried to fill the quiet gap on the line, her voice tight with nervous laughter as she asked, "You're not mad, right, Clara? We just really need the extra space for Brandon's family." I took a slow, grounding breath, keeping my tone entirely devoid of emotion, as I answered softly, "I understand completely." I tapped the red button on the glass screen, severing the connection before she could offer another rehearsed apology or hollow excuse. I didn't burst into tears, nor did I slam my phone onto the counter in a rage. At 36, after surviving years of grueling corporate shifts, navigating complex financial markets, and quietly carrying the emotional weight of my family, I had shed enough tears over ungrateful people to waste a single drop on an entitled sister. Instead, I walked deliberately into my home office, approached the dark wooden desk in the corner, and pulled open the heavy bottom drawer. Tucked neatly beneath my tax records sat a thick navy blue leather folder. I unfastened the brass clasp and pulled out the crisp white sheets of the official property deed. I ran my fingertips over the embossed county seal and the bold black lettering at the top. The legal document bore only one name as sole owner: Clara Vance. 5 years of my personal sweat, my daily sacrifices, and my disciplined financial planning were recorded on those pages. My sister and her husband had just brazenly uninvited me from my own lakefront estate, blissfully unaware of the silent storm they had just invited into their lives. I leaned back against the leather desk chair, staring at the property title, as memories of the past 5 years washed over me in vivid, painful detail. Building that lake house had not been an easy inheritance, a gift, or a lucky windfall. It was the tangible, beautiful monument to my absolute financial independence. After turning 30, while my peers were spending their bonuses on luxury European vacations, or waiting for family handouts. I was working grueling 80-hour work weeks as a senior financial analyst, living frugally in a modest rented apartment. I saved every single overtime check, every quarterly performance bonus, and every tax refund with a singular, unyielding dream in mind: to own a piece of quiet paradise along the pristine shores of Lake Canandaigua. I personally walked the overgrown lakefront lot with the land surveyor, carefully handpicked every porcelain tile for the kitchen backsplash, hired and managed the local construction contractors, and paid every single property tax bill out of my checking account. It was meticulously designed to be my sacred sanctuary, a peaceful, beautiful place where the endless noise of the corporate world could dissolve into the gentle rustle of oak trees and the rhythmic lap of water against the wooden dock. Yet, over the last 2 years, as I opened my doors to welcome Tori and Brandon for weekend getaways, my sanctuary had been quietly transformed into their personal entitlement zone. They began treating my labor of love as their rightful summer birthright, completely forgetting whose money had bought every board and nail. Looking back at the subtle shifts over the previous several months, I realized the warning signs of their growing arrogance had been blooming right before my eyes, masked by my own willingness to keep the peace. It had started small. Brandon casually leaving his bulky golf clubs in my master bedroom closet. Tori rearranging my kitchen pantry to fit their favorite imported snacks. Or Brandon referring to the dock as our boat slip when boasting to his fraternity buddies over the phone. Last summer, Brandon had even invited 3 of his corporate colleagues for an unscheduled long weekend without asking my permission first, laughing it off when I expressed my discomfort by saying, "Hey, Clara, family shares, right?" Because I loved my sister and wanted to maintain a harmonious family bond, I had consistently brushed off these creeping boundary violations, choosing quiet tolerance over uncomfortable confrontation. My silence, however, had not been interpreted as grace, kindness, or generosity. It had been misconstrued as total surrender and weakness. Brandon had gradually convinced himself that because he spent time grilling on the deck and mowing the lawn twice a summer, he held psychological squatter's rights over my multi-$100,000 lakefront investment. They no longer viewed me as the proud homeowner who had built the haven from scratch with her own hard-earned money. In their selfish, delusional eyes, I was merely an unpaid property manager who occasionally had the audacity to occupy a guest bedroom during their personal summer vacation schedule, getting in the way of their comfort. I set the blue folder down on the desk and tapped my index finger rhythmically against the dark hardwood, watching the late afternoon shadows lengthen across the rug. I looked back at the calendar on my fridge, where the date June 24th glowed in bold red marker, the exact day Brandon planned to showcase my lakefront home to 20 members of his extended family, like a triumphant, benevolent monarch. A cold, crystal-clear resolve settled over my heart, replacing the initial sting of disrespect with a sharp, exhilarating sense of personal purpose. If Tori and Brandon truly wanted a private summer vacation entirely free of my presence, I would absolutely guarantee they got one. Just not at my house. Arguing with entitled people, I knew, was a fool's errand, It only provided them with a theatrical stage to play the victim and spin fabricated stories of how unreasonable I was being to the rest of our family. I had no interest in screaming matches, tearful confrontations, or exhausting family drama that would solve nothing in the end. I preferred quiet business over noisy drama, and strategic results over emotional reactions. They believed they had outmaneuvered me with a quick, dismissive phone call, but they had fundamentally forgotten who actually owned the entire chessboard. Tapping my smartphone screen to open my contacts, I selected the private number of my trusted real estate broker. It was time to teach my sister and her husband an unforgettable, permanent lesson about real estate property rights and basic respect. The following Tuesday morning, I drove up to Canandaigua Lake under a crisp blue sky, knowing that Tori and Brandon were safely stuck at their corporate desks in the city until evening. As my tires crunched over the damp gravel driveway, the familiar sound that usually brought an instant wave of tranquility now sounded like a steady, deliberate countdown toward my absolute liberation. Unlocking the front door, I stepped across the threshold, expecting the serene comfort of my self-built haven. But disrespect stared back at me before my coat was even unbuttoned. Positioned directly beside the floor-to-ceiling stone fireplace was an empty space where my favorite floral armchair used to sit. The cozy, beautifully upholstered reading chair I had painstakingly hunted down at an antique estate sale, specifically to sit in while reading on chilly autumn evenings. In its place stood a massive, unsightly black leather recliner with bulky power buttons, aggressive stitching, and built-in plastic cup holders. A piece of furniture that loudly proclaimed Brandon's overbearing, tasteless presence. I stood in the quiet foyer, staring at the alien recliner, feeling a strange, detached chill settle over my shoulders. They hadn't merely borrowed my living space for a summer weekend. They had quietly erased my personal touch, systematically displacing my comfort to make room for his oversized ego. It was an unmistakable visual declaration of territorial dominance, executing a slow, hostile takeover of a lakeside estate they had not spent a single dime to build, foolishly assuming my quiet nature would always equate to passive submission. I walked deeper into the quiet house and stepped into the kitchen, where the systematic erasure of my personal identity continued with cold, unbothered efficiency. Opening the upper oak cabinets, I discovered that the vintage ceramic coffee mugs my late grandmother and I had gathered from small artisan shops over a decade were completely gone, neatly packed into cardboard boxes and shoved carelessly onto the dusty ledge above the refrigerator. In their prime, accessible place on the main quartz countertop stood 3 massive, neon-labeled tubs of Brandon's whey protein powder and a row of synthetic workout supplements. I moved down the hardwood hallway toward the master bedroom suite, my private sanctuary that I had carefully locked before my last departure. Turning the brass knob, I found the door unlocked and pushed it open, stepping into a room that no longer felt like mine in any way whatsoever. My soft, hand-quilted sage green bedding had been stripped away, replaced by a stark, masculine gray duvet that smelled faintly of cheap cologne. On the mahogany nightstands, my framed photographs of my late grandmother and my college graduation had been removed and stashed in a dark bottom drawer, replaced by polished silver frames displaying portraits of Brandon's parents, his siblings, and his nieces posing at an exclusive country club. They had completely annexed my personal living space, operating under the arrogant, delusional assumption that my prolonged absence was an open invitation to claim full ownership of my life, my financial investment, and my personal home. I didn't scream. Nor did I reach for my phone to demand a tearful explanation from my younger sister. Experience in the corporate financial world had taught me long ago that arguing with deeply entitled people only provides them with a dramatic platform to perform their rehearsed victimhood, and I preferred tangible results over emotional reactions. I walked straight to the hall closet, pulled out a thick roll of heavy-duty storage bags and several folded packing boxes, and began the quiet, systematic process of reclaiming what was rightfully mine. I didn't touch a single item belonging to Tori or Brandon. I meticulously packed only my personal treasures: my grandmother's vintage mugs, my watercolor paintings, my framed memories, and my soft linen sheets. As I carried the third heavy box down the porch steps and loaded it securely into the trunk of my SUV, a quiet, liberating realization settled over my spirit. They did not view me as a sister, a generous host, or the rightful homeowner. In their transactional mindset, I was merely an unpaid property manager who provided a free luxury lakefront resort and occasionally got in their way when I wanted to use my own house for my own peace and rest. I slammed the trunk shut with a solid, satisfying thud that echoed off the tall pines. The house behind me felt hollow now, completely stripped of my soul. But that empty silence made the next decisive step infinitely easier to execute, without hesitation, guilt, or regret in my heart. Later that evening, my older brother Marcus sat on the leather sofa in my suburban living room, watching me meticulously organize a stack of real estate documents on the coffee table. Unlike Tori, Marcus had spent his entire life respecting my independence and had never once viewed my hard-earned assets as his personal family playground. She actually had the nerve to tell you not to come to your own lake house? Marcus asked, shaking his head in disbelief as a dark frown settled across his features. Her exact words were that Brandon thinks it's better if they keep it exclusively for their family, I corrected calmly, sliding an official property survey across the table toward him. And they are hosting a 20-person family reunion barbecue on June 24th. Marcus scoffed loudly, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. Brandon has had his greedy eyes on that lakefront lot since the day the foundation was poured. Do you want me to call Tori right now? I'll tell her to pack their trash and hand over the keys tonight. No, Marcus. I stopped him immediately, raising my hand with calm authority. If you call her, it devolves into an exhausting family soap opera. Brandon will spin it to make me look like an unreasonable, bitter older sister ruining their summer vacation. I don't do drama, Marcus. I do business. I handed him a manila folder, and as his eyes scanned the top page, a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. You're listing it off market, I'm not just listing it, I replied, taking a measured sip of my black tea. I called a premier private broker this morning for an off-market sale. No for sale signs in the yard, no public listings for Tori to stumble upon, just quiet, verified, cash buyers looking for a turnkey summer property. Marcus chuckled, shaking his head in pure admiration. Clara, this is absolute genius. But you still have heavy antique furniture up there that carries your personal history. You can't haul all of that alone. Which is precisely why I made you dinner tonight. I smiled warmly. I rented a moving truck for tomorrow morning at dawn. We are clearing out the master bedroom suite, my antique porch swing, and the solid oak dining table Dad built for me before he passed away. We'll leave their cheap particle board furniture and Brandon's bulky leather recliner exactly where they are for the prospective buyers to see. Marcus's eyes gleamed with intense curiosity. And what happens on June 24th when they roll up with 20 family members expecting a free vacation party? On June 24th, I answered smoothly, my voice filled with unshakable peace. Brandon and Tori are going to receive an unforgettable, master-level lesson in real estate law, property rights, and basic human respect. We finished our tea in quiet satisfaction, knowing that the foundation of their arrogant illusion was about to crumble into dust beneath their feet forever. On Wednesday morning, just as the delicate morning mist was beginning to lift off the calm, glassy surface of Canandaigua Lake, Marcus and I arrived in our rented moving truck, pulling quietly up to the silent house. I walked up the wooden porch steps, pulled my brass house key from my leather purse, and slid it into the front door deadbolt. It went halfway into the slot and stopped abruptly. I frowned, wiggling it gently, but the key refused to turn in the cylinder. Pulling it out to inspect the mechanism, I noticed that the metal casing around the keyhole was gleaming, immaculate, and entirely free of the subtle surface scratches that 5 years of lakefront weather usually leave behind. Brandon had secretly changed the deadbolt. A cold, crystal-clear wave of comprehension washed over me in the quiet morning air. This was no longer just my sister being inconsiderate or my brother-in-law being casually pushy. This was a calculated, deliberate attempt by Brandon to lock me out of my own multi-$100,000 real estate investment. He truly believed that possession was 9/10 of the law, operating under the arrogant, delusional assumption that I would arrive, find myself locked out, and quietly retreat in shame without raising a fight. Marcus noticed the shiny new metal casing too, his jaw clenching tightly as his face darkened with immediate protective fury. "This is crossing a massive legal line, Clara," he muttered, taking a step toward the porch window. "I'm breaking a glass pane right now to get us inside." "You will do no such thing, Marcus," I instructed calmly, placing a firm, steady hand on his forearm to anchor his rising temper. "Walk around to the back patio with me. Remember the sliding glass door? The secondary lock mechanism relies on a heavy metal security rod I installed myself, and I never gave them the combination to the outdoor lockbox where I keep the spare patio key." We walked quietly around the wraparound porch to the rear deck overlooking the water. Bound securely to the gas meter pipe was the heavy black lockbox, completely untouched. I punched in my private 4-digit code, heard the satisfying metallic click, retrieved the spare key, and unlocked the sliding glass door without causing a single scratch to my property. Inside, Marcus and I worked with quiet, mechanical efficiency for 3 uninterrupted hours. We carefully dismantled the heavy oak dining table that Dad had built, unbolted the antique wooden porch swing, and packed every single family heirloom that carried my personal history into the back of the rental truck. We left their cheap particle board guest desks and Brandon's bulky leather recliner exactly where they were, stripping the house clean of my personal soul while leaving their artificial presence untouched. As Marcus locked the sliding patio door behind us, I looked at the house one last time, feeling no sorrow, regret, or lingering bitterness. Only the clean, sharp, exhilarating sensation of taking my life, my financial investment, my personal autonomy, and my dignity back for good. 2 days later, my private real estate broker, Nancy, sat across from me at my suburban kitchen table, her eyes sparkling with professional triumph as she slid a single sheet of official paper toward me. I showed the lakefront property off-market to a lovely couple from out of state yesterday, Nancy explained, tapping her pen gently against her notebook. They are retiring early, looking for an immediate lakefront retreat, and they absolutely fell in love with the privacy and the fact that the guest rooms are already furnished with basic items. I picked up the document and scanned the bold numbers. It was a pristine, all-cash offer that actually exceeded my initial asking price by $15,000. There's only one major condition, Nancy added with a confident, knowing smile. They want a fast closing because they intend to spend the entire summer on the lake, so they have formally requested a closing date of June 20th. I stared at the bold numbers printed on the paper. June 20th. Exactly 4 days before Brandon's massive family reunion, and 4 days before Tori planned to host her extended in-laws on my dime. Are there any financial contingencies? I asked, holding my pen steadily above the signature line. None at all, Nancy assured me firmly. They waived the formal home inspection since the house is only 5 years old. Once you sign this, we open escrow immediately, and the full funds will be wired directly into your bank account next week. Tell them we have a deal, I said, signing my name on the document in smooth, bold strokes. Clara Vance. As Nancy packed her leather briefcase and prepared to leave, my smartphone buzzed softly on the granite countertop. It was a text message from Tori. Hey, Clara, the notification read on the screen. Brandon's parents were asking if you have a larger stainless steel grill at your main house that we could borrow for the 24th. The one up at the lake house is way too small for all the prime meat Brandon bought. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, almost admiring the breathtaking sheer audacity of her request. She was asking to borrow my personal appliances to host a party at a house from which she had just uninvited me. I didn't type out a long, emotional paragraph detailing her betrayal, nor did I mention the changed deadbolts or the moving truck that had cleared out my heirlooms from the lake house. I simply typed out a brief, icy reply. I don't have a grill for you to borrow. Have a good summer. I tapped send, immediately muted her notifications in my phone settings, and poured myself a fresh cup of Earl Grey tea. The financial gears were officially in motion, moving forward with the unyielding precision of a heavy freight train, and nothing my sister or her husband could say or do now could stop the inevitable outcome from unfolding. The 20th of June arrived with clear, pristine skies and a gentle summer breeze rustling through the oak trees. I dressed in a tailored navy linen suit, gathered my official legal documents, and drove to the escrow office in downtown Rochester. The buyers, a warm, cultured, retired couple named Arthur and Helen Montgomery, sat across the polished mahogany conference table, practically glowing with excitement as they discussed their plans to buy a pontoon boat and spend their evenings watching the sunset. "It is such a breathtaking property, Clara," Helen beamed, sliding a stack of signed documents toward the escrow officer. "We really appreciate how quickly and smoothly you moved on this entire transaction." "I am truly delighted that the home is going to people who will honor and appreciate the space," I replied warmly, signing the final deed transfer documents with absolute certainty. As I slid the single patio key across the mahogany surface, I mentioned casually, "Just a quick heads up. The front door deadbolt was recently replaced by a family member who misplaced a key. You will definitely want a locksmith to come out and rekey the entire house anyway, for your own peace of mind." "Oh, absolutely," Arthur nodded firmly. "We already have a professional locksmith scheduled for tomorrow morning." The escrow officer stamped the final page, announcing that the transaction was officially closed and the wire transfer initiated. I walked out into the afternoon sun feeling light, sovereign, and completely free in my new life. Sitting in the quiet, climate-controlled sanctuary of my SUV outside the escrow office, I opened my mobile banking app, refreshed the screen, and watched the official wire transfer materialize in my checking account. A very large, extraordinarily comfortable six-figure number illuminated the glass display, cementing the permanent financial reality of my absolute independence. For years, I had quietly operated under the exhausting, mistaken assumption that true security was found in accommodating everyone else's demands, keeping my head down and managing domestic peace at the total expense of my own comfort. But staring at those bold, unyielding digits, I felt an invisible 10-pound weight lift cleanly off my chest, replaced by an intoxicating sense of lightness and self-sovereignty. That money was not just a windfall from a routine real estate transaction. It was the tangible crystallization of my firm boundaries, paid directly in cash for every hour of unpaid labor, stress, and silent endurance I had poured into a house that was never truly respected by those I held dear. For 36 years, I had allowed myself to be defined by what I could provide, give away, or fix for my ungrateful family, foolishly believing that self-sacrifice was the only currency that purchased love, respect, and belonging. Now, standing on the unshakable bedrock of my own financial autonomy, I knew that my boundaries were no longer soft guidelines written in pencil. They were forged in permanent ink, unbending, clean, and completely non-negotiable for the rest of my life. Instead of driving straight home to ruminate over the looming fallout, I steered my car directly downtown, toward a charming boutique travel agency I had walked past 100 times over the past few years. For over 6 years, I had put off my lifelong dream of exploring the ancient cobblestone streets of Italy, constantly convincing myself that I was too busy managing corporate deadlines or coordinating my lakefront home's chaotic summer schedule for my ungrateful family. I walked through the heavy glass doors, inhaled the crisp scent of fresh espresso and polished leather chairs, and sat down across from a smiling travel consultant. I unzipped my purse, placed my pristine blue passport squarely on her mahogany desk, and looked her dead in the eye with a calm, unbothered smile that felt entirely new to my spirit. "I need a first-class ticket to Rome," I said softly, feeling a sudden spark of genuine, childlike joy ignite deep within my heart. "And I need to depart on the morning of June 25th. As the agent clacked away on her keyboard, reserving my seat on a transatlantic flight overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, a profound sense of emotional healing washed over my soul. I wasn't running away from an uncomfortable confrontation or hiding from family fallout. I was stepping boldly into a long overdue chapter of personal discovery, honoring the young woman who had sacrificed her own desires, time, and happiness for far too long to please others around her. The following afternoon, I spent 2 quiet hours in the wood-paneled conference office of my longtime estate attorney, finalizing the structural destiny of my newly acquired wealth. I had no interest in letting my hard-earned assets sit idle as a tempting target for future family guilt trips, emotional blackmail, or entitlement games from my sister and her husband. Together, we crafted an irrevocable trust, transferring the vast majority of the house sale proceeds into a secure, professionally managed fund strictly earmarked for my future children's higher education and a prominent regional pediatric medical charity. The legal language was ironclad, razor-sharp, and meticulously drafted to ensure that neither Tori nor Brandon, nor any future legal maneuverings on their part, could ever touch, inherit, or influence a single cent of the principal. My attorney leaned back in his leather swivel chair, capped his golden fountain pen, and looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses with deep professional approval. "This effectively locks down your financial legacy, Clara," he stated plainly, sliding the signed documents into a heavy red folder. "You have completely stripped them of any legal standing, inheritance claims, or financial recourse whatsoever." I smiled warmly, shaking his hand firmly, knowing that true protection isn't about building higher walls around your heart, but establishing unassailable legal and financial boundaries that quietly enforce your self-respect without requiring you to raise your voice ever again in conflict, argument, or emotional distress. On Friday evening, the 23rd of June, the air was warm, sweet, and filled with the gentle hum of summer cicadas as my older brother Marcus came over for dinner. We sat on my back patio beneath long strings of glowing Edison lights, eating grilled Atlantic salmon, drinking a crisp, chilled Sauvignon Blanc, and enjoying the peaceful stillness of a summer dusk. Marcus swirled the pale wine in his crystal glass, a mischievous, knowing grin spreading across his face as he checked his smartphone screen. "Tori texted me twice today complaining that you've been unusually distant and unresponsive." Marcus chuckled softly, taking a slow sip. "She also complained bitterly that when Brandon went up to the lake house yesterday afternoon to drop off 3 massive beer coolers, some of your antique furniture was mysteriously missing from the living room." I sliced off a piece of grilled salmon, feeling completely unbothered by her frantic digital probing. "What did you tell her?" I asked mildly, taking a sip of my wine. I told her that you took your personal antiques home to be professionally cleaned and restored. Marcus grinned, his dark eyes sparkling with pure amusement. Which is, legally, factually, and technically, the absolute truth. We laughed quietly together, listening to the soft rustle of oak leaves overhead, fully aware that Brandon had been far too oblivious to notice the new deadbolt on the front door, or care, as long as he could drop off his coolers. As the bright stars began to pin themselves against the darkening velvet sky, a deep, unshakable serenity settled over my soul, completely void of the anxiety, panic, or guilt that used to govern my decisions in the past. I didn't pace my living room floors, nor did I lie awake wondering if I was being overly harsh, petty, or cruel to my younger sister. For 36 years, I had carried the exhausting, invisible burden of ensuring everyone else was comfortable, well-fed, and entertained, often at the direct expense of my own personal dignity and peace of mind. But the very second Brandon took it upon himself to change the deadbolts on my property and Tori uninvited me from my own home, they officially severed their status as family guests and became trespassers on my goodwill. They had chosen the path of arrogance, entitlement, and deceit, completely blind to the reality that actions carry real-world legal and financial consequences. I looked down at my wristwatch. It was precisely 8 o'clock in the evening. In less than 16 hours, the sun would rise on Saturday, June 24th, and reality was gonna hit Brandon and Tori like a runaway freight train. I picked up the wine bottle, looked at my brother, and smiled with complete, sovereign peace. "More wine, Marcus?" I asked gently. "Absolutely, Clara," he replied, raising his glass to toast the official dawn of my personal freedom and new beginning. At precisely 1:15 on Saturday afternoon, June 24th, a convoy of 4 sleek SUVs pulled triumphantly up the gravel driveway of the lakefront estate under a blazing summer sun. Brandon stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing an expensive, tailored linen shirt, gesturing grandly toward the timbered porch and stone fireplace as 20 members of his extended family spilled out onto the lush lawn with heavy luggage, coolers, and high expectations. He loudly announced to his father, his siblings, and his visiting in-laws that this pristine Canandaigua sanctuary was his personal weekend villa, a crowning investment he had secured through his own corporate success and vision. Striding up the wooden steps with theatrical flair, he pulled out his shiny brass key, the very deadbolt he had secretly installed weeks earlier to displace me, and slid it smoothly into the keyhole with a satisfied, arrogant grin. He turned his wrist, expecting the heavy oak door to swing wide open into air-conditioned luxury. But the key cylinder remained entirely immovable. Panic flickered behind his eyes as he jiggled the key frantically, applying all his body weight until the metal scraped uselessly against a brand new internal lock mechanism. Unbeknownst to Brandon, a certified professional locksmith hired by Arthur and Helen Montgomery had rekeyed every single deadbolt on the property at 8 o'clock that morning. Standing on the porch, surrounded by his whispering relatives, Brandon felt his face flush dark red as he banged his fist uselessly against the solid wood, completely blind to the reality that his empire of lies was crumbling around his feet. Inside her quiet suburban house, while Arthur and Helen peered nervously through the sheer living room curtains at the angry crowd gathering on their front deck, my smartphone began vibrating violently against my granite kitchen counter. I picked it up, pressed the speakerphone icon, and set it down without a single trace of hesitation, doubt, or fear. Tori's voice instantly erupted through the speaker, breathless, erratic, and bordering on total hysteria, punctuated by the sharp sound of dogs barking and people arguing loudly in the background. "Clara, where on earth are you right now?" Tori shrieked into the receiver. "Brandon and I just pulled up to the lake house with his entire family, and our keys aren't working. There are elderly strangers inside unpacking groceries into our kitchen, and their car is parked right in the middle of our driveway. What is going on here?" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled iced tea, remaining completely poised, calm, and utterly devoid of emotional panic. "The people inside are Arthur and Helen Montgomery," I stated in a clear, measured tone that carried easily through the sunlit room. "Who on earth are Arthur and Helen?" Tori demanded, her frantic tone shifting rapidly into raw, unraveling shock. "They are the legal, all-cash owners of the lakefront property," I answered simply, letting the unvarnished truth hang in the heavy air between us. Absolute, deafening silence instantly descended over her end of the line, as if the entire conversation had suddenly halted to witness the total, permanent collapse of their arrogance and entitlement. Within 10 minutes, the sharp, wailing siren of an official police cruiser echoed across the quiet neighborhood as Sheriff Miller from the county sheriff's department pulled into the driveway, responding to a frantic 911 trespassing call placed by Helen. The uniformed officer stepped out of his vehicle, his hand resting authoritatively on his utility belt as he marched up the wooden porch steps to intercept the chaotic, shouting crowd gathered at the front door. Arthur opened the heavy oak door, remaining perfectly composed, and handed Sheriff Miller a crisp, stamped manila folder containing the certified property deed, the escrow closing statement, and the wire transfer receipt, signed by Clara Vance 4 days earlier. Sheriff Miller examined the embossed county seals, verified the official legal documentation, and turned to face Brandon, whose forehead was glistening with cold sweat in the humid afternoon heat. "Sir, these citizens are the verified, legal owners of this residence," Sheriff Miller declared in a booming, stern voice that echoed across the quiet lawn for every single family member to hear clearly. "If you claim any ownership or legitimate tenancy rights to this private real estate, I need you to present your deed, a signed lease agreement, or official government documentation right now in front of me." Brandon stood completely frozen on the top step, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, unable to produce a single shred of paper, because he possessed nothing more than stolen confidence, arrogance, and an obsolete brass key that was completely useless in his hands. The silence that settled over the driveway was absolute, heavy, and utterly devastating. As Brandon's father stepped forward, his eyes wide with profound disappointment, disbelief, and utter humiliation. In a single, agonizing moment, Brandon's father recognized the staggering, unvarnished truth. His son had not bought a luxury lakefront estate at all, but had spent years lying, posturing, and parasitically leeching off his wife's 36-year-old sister. The elaborate illusion of Brandon's corporate grandiosity dissolved into dust before the very eyes of 20 relatives who had traveled across the country to celebrate his non-existent generosity. Adding a masterstroke of ironic, poetic justice to his public downfall, Arthur quietly unlocked the side garage door, pushed open the gate, and pointed to a neatly organized pile near the driveway curb. Settled right beside the recycling bins stood Brandon's massive black leather recliner, his neon tubs of whey protein powder, and his synthetic workout supplements, all discarded as worthless junk by the new homeowners during their morning settling-in process. Seeing his prized leather throne sitting on the grass next to the garbage cans, flanked by his entire silent, judging family, Brandon experienced a humiliating reality check so profound it shattered his fragile ego beyond repair in front of everyone. His father turned away without saying a single word, walked back to his vehicle, and commanded the rest of the family to pack their luggage and leave the property immediately before trespassing charges were formally filed by law enforcement. Seething with humiliation, Brandon snatched Tori's phone from her shaking hands, shoved his way through the departing relatives, and barked into the receiver with wild, unbridled rage. "Clara! What kind of sick, twisted game are you playing with us? You sold our house behind our backs? You ruined my family's entire summer vacation!" I leaned back comfortably against my kitchen counter, holding my watering can, my voice level, sterile, and cold as surgical steel. "I didn't sell your house, Brandon. I sold my house. The one I built with my hard-earned money, and the one you had the audacity to change the deadbolts on without my permission." Brandon stumbled over his words, attempting to yell about family unity and respect, but I cut through his noise with absolute, unshakable authority. You wanted a luxury summer home for your family? Now, you can go buy one yourself. Please apologize to Arthur and Helen for trespassing on their private driveway, and clear out before Sheriff Miller places you in handcuffs. I am no longer funding your delusions. Without waiting for his furious reply, I tapped the screen, ended the call, and opened my phone settings to permanently block Brandon's number forever. I left Tori unmuted, set the phone down on the windowsill, and stepped out onto my sunlit patio. As the soft summer breeze rustled through my garden, I calmly watered my blooming red roses, wrapped in the sweetest, most profound peace I had ever known in my entire life. I spent the next 4 weeks wandering through the sun-drenched, ancient streets of Italy, completely surrendered to a rhythmic, unhurried pace of living I had never allowed myself to experience in my adult life. From the quiet morning hours spent sipping rich espresso at cobblestone cafes in Florence, to long, leisurely afternoons admiring masterworks inside Tuscan art museums, my spirit slowly untangled itself from 36 years of habitual tension and family caretaking. I ate handmade pasta at family-run trattorias, drifted along the shimmering canals of Venice, and fell into deep, unbroken slumber every single night without setting an alarm or checking my phone for frantic family emergencies. For the first time in my 36 years, my calendar was completely bare, utterly devoid of corporate deadlines, domestic chores, or the exhausting obligation to manage other people's fragile emotions and unreasonable demands. In the quiet solitude of those Mediterranean evenings, as warm ocean breezes swept across my hotel balcony, I realized that true emotional healing wasn't about forgetting the betrayal or holding on to a righteous, bitter grudge. It was about learning to inhabit my own skin with quiet, unconditional grace and self-compassion. The distance across the Atlantic Ocean provided a necessary sanctuary where the sharp edges of my past could finally smooth out, replaced by a profound, radiant understanding that my life was not an audition for anyone else's conditional approval, but a sacred canvas meant entirely for my own genuine joy, personal freedom, emotional healing, and inner peace. When I returned home to Rochester in late July, refreshed, sun-kissed, and deeply anchored in my self-worth, I used a small portion of the house sale proceeds to completely remodel my suburban kitchen, replacing the old countertops with warm quartz and installing a panoramic window overlooking my flower garden. Meanwhile, the financial and emotional fallout from June 24th was rippling through my sister's household with unforgiving precision. Brandon had been forced to spend $10,000 of his own savings on a frantic, last-minute luxury cabin rental to accommodate his 20 disappointed relatives that weekend, an unexpected expense that sparked severe financial strain and bitter resentment between them. Tori eventually learned from Marcus that Brandon had secretly changed my deadbolts weeks before the party without my knowledge or consent. A revelation that shattered her blind loyalty and exposed his manipulative, controlling nature to her once and for all. Their marriage plunged into a cold, rocky crisis as the illusion of his effortless prosperity completely evaporated, leaving Tori to confront the harsh reality of the man she had chosen to enable for years. Marcus came over often, helping me install new cedar planters on my back patio, and as we worked side by side in the warm afternoon sun, I felt a deep, enduring gratitude for a brother whose quiet respect, genuine kindness, and unwavering loyalty had never required me to shrink myself, compromise my boundaries, or appease anyone else in my personal life going forward. Nearly 3 months after my return from Italy, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in autumn, a soft, hesitant knock echoed at my front door. I opened it to find Tori standing on the porch, looking visibly exhausted, stripped of her usual defensive posture, and holding a small bouquet of fresh white lilies. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she looked at me, her voice trembling as she asked softly if she could step inside for a moment. We sat across from each other at my newly renovated kitchen island, the silence between us heavy with months of unspoken grief, regret, and painful realization. Tori broke down into genuine, unscripted tears, confessing that she had finally moved out of Brandon's house, temporarily to stay at a local apartment, realizing how deeply his toxic entitlement had infected her own judgment and character over the past few years. "I am so deeply sorry, Clara," she sobbed, reaching out her trembling hands across the quartz counter. I was so terrified of rocking the boat in my marriage that I let Brandon push you out of your own life. I stood by while he disrespected the sister who built everything from scratch with her own hard-earned hands. And I mistook your quiet grace for weakness. I lost my way completely, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I needed you to hear the absolute, unvarnished truth from my own lips today, face to face. I reached across the counter, gently folding my hands over hers, offering a warm, steady presence that was neither vengeful nor soft enough to be exploited ever again. I accept your apology, Tori, and I forgive you from the bottom of my heart, I said softly, keeping my tone calm, loving, yet unyieldingly firm. Forgiveness is easy when you no longer allow yourself to be a victim, but you need to understand something fundamentally clear about our relationship going forward. I am your older sister, Tori, not your financial safety net, your emotional shock absorber, or an unpaid property manager for your husband's grand illusions. My boundaries are permanent, and I will never again be pushed into the dark corner of any room or house that I built with my own hands, my own sweat, and my own hard-earned money. Tori nodded slowly, wiping her tears with a paper napkin, finally grasping the immovable, dignified boundary I had drawn between us. I made it clear that while I loved her dearly and wished her genuine healing, my financial resources, my personal property, and my peace of mind were completely off limits to future manipulation. I was no longer willing to sacrifice my self-respect to maintain a fragile, artificial peace in our family. And if we were to rebuild our family bond, it would be built entirely on mutual respect, honesty, and individual responsibility from this day forward. In the months that followed, my relationship with Tori began the slow, delicate process of rebuilding, structured entirely around public lunches, honest conversations, and healthy, independent emotional distance. Brandon remained permanently blocked, completely excluded from my personal life, forced to navigate his own financial lessons without my quiet sponsorship, tolerance, or intervention. On a golden afternoon in early October, as crisp autumn leaves floated gently onto my back patio, I poured a fresh cup of hot Earl Grey tea and stepped out onto the deck, gazing at the vibrant red roses blooming proudly along the wooden fence. A profound, unshakable sense of peace wrapped around my shoulders, like a warm, protective blanket. The journey from an insulting phone call to total liberation had not been easy, but it had taught me the ultimate truth of modern womanhood. Self-respect is not something you beg for or demand from others, but something you honor within yourself by walking away from tables where love is served as a conditional reward. I held the warm ceramic mug in both hands, taking a slow, deep breath of the crisp autumn air, and smiled warmly at the golden sun above. I had built a haven, handed back the keys to toxic entitlement, and stepped boldly into the open world. My life was no longer an echo of someone else's demands. It was completely, beautifully, and undeniably my own.